Boker Tov. As was mentioned the whole week, the whole year, as long since we've gotten back on track, this year's shiurim is in memory of Elisheva Frist, Elisheva Sima Bat Zalman Zechronah Livracha, and at the time that we asked Kadosh Baruch Hu to look out for all of our chayalim, unfortunately we heard the news of two who fell last night in Khan Yunis, but there was also a glimmer of good news with the unbelievable rescue of two of the hostages. It shows the kind of Mesirat Nefesh our Chayalim have, and you should, Ken Yirbu, Amen v'Amen. And I can tell you that even without knowing all the details, our Chayalim, when they infiltrated that apartment house in Rafiach on the second floor, they bodily covered the hostages so that if there were going to be bullets, and there were bullets, they should take the bullets and not the hostages. I'm telling you, you're talking about a level of Mesirat Nefesh that I think Avraham Avinu would be very proud of, in every sense of the word. And we know that sometimes it's difficult to express Hallel to Kadosh Baruch Hu when there's so much grief and sadness that goes along with it. But the Rav taught us many years ago that our Hallel is actually a fusion of Hallel and Tachnunim, of petition. Because we say, Hodul Hashem ki tov kulam chazdov. That's wonderful. You can't get better than that. And the next breath, you say, Min hametzar karati. The next breath, Min hametzar karati. We call out from distress, and which ends with, as Rabbi Ahron said, An Hashem Mashiachna, An Hashem Matzlichana. So the Rav explained this in the context of the Seder night, where we say, "V'nomar lefanav shira chadasha, hallelujah," and we worthy of singing the new song. So what does that mean? A new Kalbach Nigun? I mean, what does it mean, shira chadasha? Somebody's going to write new lyrics to Hallel? He said, no, it's going to be a new style of Hallel. Hallel without Tachnunim. It's just going to be pure, unadulterated Hallel. And that's what we're looking for, the Shira Chadasha. And we're not there yet, unfortunately. So we do have to offer our great Shirot v'Tishbachot to Borei Olam, that he allowed this Pu'ula to work out, and it worked out. And one Chayal was scratched, but nothing to write home about. And really, we came back, and it just went well, thank God. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu we know something that the business of Rafiach is starting, and it's starting big. And we're going to hear news, unfortunately, because that's Darka Shaloilam. But the Kadosh Baruch Hu should allow us to get this job done as efficiently and quickly as possible, so that we can bring all our chayalim home. I'll repeat what I said last week. Yi shalom b'cheilech. The chayil in that pasuk means the choma of Yerushalayim, but our soldiers are our choma, and there should be shalom by our chayalim. But more importantly, shalva be'armonatayach, in the armon, in the seat of government, there should also be some tranquility. It wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt. Shalva be'armonatayach. We need that as well. We'll see if we can finish with this one page that we're sitting on for a few weeks, because I do have things to continue. But the illustration of Birkat Torah for purposes of nusach, of different shades and colors of tefillah, is so, in Hebrew we say bolet, it's so outstanding. To make a few points further that we continue from last week. So on source number 3, where we talked about the Birkat Torah, I'm going to read it again. Hamashkim lukrot b'Torah kodem shikra ki hashma. A guy gets up early in the morning, I guess because he was watching the Super Bowl. So, and I'm going to mention that Robert Kraft has a chelik in Olam Haba for shelling out $7 million for 7 30-second slots of, instead of stupid commercials that they produced for the Super Bowl, they were pro-Israel comments and about the hostages and so on. Okay, so his team didn't make it this year. That's part of the Yisurim that he had. Who won? You don't know who won? Okay, so I didn't watch the game either, but the 49ers won in overtime, 22 to... No. Kansas City? Oh, Kansas City. See, I didn't even know. See, I got it all wrong. Look at that, see? Wrong team. Kansas City won in overtime, 22 to 19. Yofi. Right, okay. There you go. Thank you for being corrected. Do you know that when I was doing Army, and my Army was to give shurim, 40 shurim in the Army, in the Air Force, I had the best miluim in the world. So I once got a notice of a court-martial. Court-martial? I mean, what did I do wrong that they should summon me? I got a summons to a court-martial. So somebody, one of the Ramim in Har Etzion, Ezra Bick, said, "What you said? Bump shot in the Rambam? I mean, what happened?" He said a bad shot in the Rambam, and they're summoning you to a. It turns out it was a mistake in the Mispar Ishi in the Army ID number. There was a mistake by one number, and I got the call. So it wasn't me, you know. Yep. So the Rambam says if you get up early in the morning before the time of Kriyat Shema, you get up 4 a.m, and you want to do Daf Yomi, you know, it's a nice time to learn. Nobody's going to bother you, guarantee you no phone calls, and so on. So whether you're studying Torah Shebichtav or Torah Shebal Peh, it makes no difference if you're learning Chumash or Tehillim or Nevi'im or you're learning Mishnah or Gemara, whatever it is. And the reason the Rambam says this, because in the Gemara there's a discussion, what type of Torah do you have to study in order to be obligated in Birkat Torah? The bottom line is everything. Makes no difference. So the Rambam just broadly says, makes no difference. Whether it's the written law, the oral law, Torah Shabbat, what do you do? No tel yadav tchila, you have to wash your hands in the morning. Nitela yadayim. U'mevarer shalosh brachot. You say 3 brachot. V'achar kach korei, and then you can study. Ve'elohen, here are the brachot. Asher kidshanu, of course it begins with Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, as every other bracha. Asher kitshanu b'mzav v'tzivanu al divrei Torah. So, you know, if you this morning said v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, don't panic out. We have Nusach Ashkenaz here on this, and la'asok b'divrei Torah, it means involvement, and many commentators have tried to figure out what the addition of la'asok b'divrei Torah. Asek means involvement, activity. Al divrei Torah means, and God has commanded us over divrei Torah, that we should be studying Torah. That we understand. But what is la'asok b'divrei Torah? So the Rav once said, Rav Soloveitchik once said that it has to do with that Talmud Torah is not necessarily a mitzvah of accomplishment. Nobody's going to ask you at the end of the day, all right, how much did you accomplish? How many parakim of Tanakh did you study? How many parakim of Mishnah or Mesichtot of Gemara did you complete? Nobody's going to ask you that question. The question was whether you were kovea itim la Torah. Did you have in your life schedule, for some person it could be daily, for some person it could be weekly, whatever it is, did you have a block of time in your life schedule for Talmud Torah? And hopefully we're going to be able to answer yes, because it's Monday at 9:15. So you can say yes to that question. Yes, there's a blocked out time for Talmud Torah. Nobody's going to ask you, what do you remember from that year? Don't worry, don't get nervous. Nobody's going to ask that question. It has nothing to do with accomplishment. It has to do with involvement. And involvement comes also in different levels. Some people's involvement is superficial. Some people's involvement is a little bit more deeper. So we say la'asok, to get involved in it. There's an involvement of intellectual, sometimes even emotional, in Torah study. So that's what the la'asok basically comes to add to the Rambam's standard version, V'tzivanu al divrei Torah, as all of our Sephardi brethren say till this very day, V'tzivanu al divrei Torah. But there was also another understanding to la'asok from the word esek, which means business. There is a concept called Yisachar and Zvulun. So smach Zvulun b'tzeitecha v'Yisachar be'ohalecha. It's in Parshat Zot HaBracha, tail end of the Torah. We're laying it on Simchat Torah, and believe me, next year's Simchat Torah is going to be different than all previous Simchat Torah. Smach Zvulun b'tzeitecha v'Yisachar be'ohalecha talks about the partnership arrangement between the Torah study person and the person who's bankrolling the Torah studying person, which is a legitimate enterprise. Now, not everybody is either capable or has the time or the ability to be involved in much Torah study. Everybody is obligated for some Torah study, but to get involved into excessive Torah study, that for people who have the time, the effort, and the capability. But that usually comes at the expense of making a living. But if somebody, and I'm going to stress now, volunteers, this is the Rambam's point, somebody volunteers to finance and bankroll somebody's sustenance and parnasa, that's a wonderful thing. That's called Yisachar and Zvulun. Zvulun were international merchants, and they worked on from the sea, from the Mediterranean, and they bankrolled people from Yisachar tribe of studying Torah. So this became an acceptable relationship, where Chazal said that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will reward the Zvulun people with reward of Talmud Torah, even though they may not have cracked a book, but they were busy making money, essentially, but then supporting the Torah studiers. That's okay. There's only one little thing that people sometimes forget to say. But Mr. Zvulun is going to remain an ignoramus, an amoritz. He's not going to become a Talmud Chacham like that. He'll receive credit for the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Kadosh Baruch Hu is not going to fault him for wasting his time, because he's doing something constructive with his money. So the Rambam had an older brother. His name was David ben Maimon, who was a Zvulun person. He was an international shipper. And he allowed his younger brother, Moishele, to sit and learn and be able to be creative and write and study and so on, until the catastrophe happened where the boat sunk in the Indian Ocean with all his wares. He had all kinds of stuff to bring in from India. So all of a sudden, the family is now poor, without support, and the Rambam slips into a depression in the clinical sense. He cannot get out of bed for a year. He writes this. He's not embarrassed to write this, that he was depressed for a year. And the sad part was that he didn't have Prozac. Prozac would have helped him. I'm not joking. It could have helped him. But he just had to work himself out. And when he finally is able to put himself back together, the community in Fostat, which is Old Cairo, wants to support him so he can continue with his learning endeavors. And he doesn't want to accept from the community. He says, even though it was voluntary, people are going to get the wrong message and think that this is a nice thing to ask for, that somebody else should support me. And he said, that's a chilul Hashem. That's a chilul Hashem, says the Rambam. So if you have a fellow who's got an eligible daughter and is looking for a top koil guy, and he says, you know what, I'm willing to support you for 20 years, vakasha, that's fine, go right ahead. But if a guy sitting in koil says, and I'm worth $100,000 a year because I'm the next Vilna Gaon, and you better shell out, to have me as your son-in-law, the Rambam says that's a chilul Hashem. You're not allowed to do that. So the Rambam goes to work, and he becomes a doctor. I mean, he knew the medicine before. And in those days, you didn't have to have a certificate from a medical school. You had to have a proven track record that you were a good doctor. And somehow word got to the Sultan of Cairo, and it was a trip. The Rambam describes about 3-hour journey daily to get to the palace and treat the royal family, and he does it, and he makes a living. He makes a good living, and that's because he felt that he didn't want to accept anything from the community. But his brother David was the one who supported him. So Smach Zvulun b'tzetecha v'yisacha bo'alecha is legitimate. And that's why some say the language of the bracha is la'asok b'divrei Torah. For some people, their connection to Talmud Torah is through their business, is their esek. Okay, that sounds homiletic. I think what the Rav suggested was more in the pshat range, that the esek means involvement, a deeper involvement, and not a superficial involvement in lasok. But the Rambam's language is vitzivanu al divrei Torah, and then comes the next word, which is what we talked about last week. Is it veha'arevna or ha'arevna? The story of the vav hachibur, which is the conjunction and it makes a world of a difference if you are in the middle of a bracha. Do you say v'tzivanu al divrei Torah v'ha'arevna? And God should sweeten. Arevut means sweeten here. Sweeten the words of Torah to us. Make it pleasant. And then you're still in the middle of a bracha. And if you overhear somebody saying Birkat Torah and he says v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, you do not answer Amen because it's the middle of a bracha. Or is it the end of the bracha and you do answer Amen, and the next bracha begins with Ha'arevna Hashem Elokeinu without the conjunction and, without the vav. I pointed out that if you look at source number 4, you see the author of the Hagaot Maimoniyot. Hagaot Maimoniyot is the one who wrote comments on Maimon, on the Rambam. He happens to be the nephew of the Maharam Merutenberg, Moreno Meir ben Baruch, and he too, I don't have his name in my head right this second, but he too, the author of the Hagaot Maimoniyot, one second, I may have it here. See, I wrote it. Rabbi Meir HaKohen from Rothenburg. His name was Rabbi Meir HaKohen from Rothenburg, and he dies also as a martyr, as his uncle did, Maharam Rothenburg. Maharam Rothenburg was taken captive, was a hostage, and gave up psak halacha. Nobody should redeem him, because that would encourage more kidnapping. And he dies in captivity, and I think his body is left 9 or 11 years until it's allowed to be buried. His nephew was murdered in the Rindfleisch pogrom of 1298 in Germany, one of the many, many pogroms. And I'm going to repeat what I said 2-3 weeks ago. What happened on Simchat Torah was not the Shoah, not even close to the Shoah, but it was a pogrom. It was a pogrom in the classic medieval Jewish history sense, with one big difference. After the Rindfleisch pogrom or any of the other pogroms, the only thing we can do is say Kaddish and Yizkar. And now we can fight back. There's a very, very, very big difference. Very big difference. And Baruch Hashem, we're here and not there. That we're able to fight back. So the Hagaot Maimoniyot, what he does to the Rambam is basically what the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, does for the Shulchan Aruch. He makes it Ashkenazi friendly. The Rambam is a Sephardi enterprise, and if an Ashkenazi is reading it, so just to draw your attention to the fact that we do it differently. We do it differently. And my great example is Purim. I mean, it's Chodesh Adar already. It's only Adar Rishon, but we have to be prepared for a month and a half to read the Megillah. So Ashkenazim make the Shechayanu twice, at night and in the morning. Sfardim only do it at night, and no need to do it in the morning. And the truth is, and that's the Rambam's opinion. So the Hagaot Maimoniyot, on the section of the Rambam saying that there's no repetition of Shechayanu in the morning, says, but we Ashkenazim do. He quotes, I think, Maharam Rothenberg, his uncle. He says, we say the Shechayanu again. So that's what. So if you're following the Hagaot Maimoniyot as you're studying Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, you get the Ashkenazi point of view. And here, Hagaot Maimoniyot says, if you can look in source number 4, HaTosfot. Tosfot is the Balei HaTosafot, the Chachmei Ashkenaz. Katvu sheyesh likro v'ha'arev bivav, with a vav, the hakol bracha achati. It's all one long bracha. And then, of course, there's a second bracha, shebacha banu mikol amim. But if the Rambam doesn't have the vav, and it's ha'arev na Hashem Elokeinu, we Ashkenazim have a vav, but the Sfardim don't, so it becomes 3 brachot. Asher kitchan v'sav v'sivan al divrei Torah, ha'arev na Hashem Elokeinu until hamlamei Torah, and then Asher bacha banu, 3 brachot. There's only one problem of all this. If you just go back to source number 3, you see it's printed v'ha'arev with a vav, and I'm quoting the Rambam. What happened here? So I mentioned last week that this is a phenomenon that I wrote about in my book. It's chapter 9, for those who are going to look it up. It's brachot and tfilot in the Mishnah Torah b'nusach Ashkenaz. How in the world can there be nusach Ashkenaz in the Rambam's writing? And the answer is, it's the printers. It's the printers. When I mentioned that I had a colleague at Harvard 2 years ago, Professor Tamara Morsel Eisenberg, and she taught me about how the process was from the manuscript to the print. From the Rav son, Rav Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, I heard 52 years ago that when you have a Sephardi text being printed in Ashkenaz, look out for the nusach, that sometimes they might erroneously print the Nusach Ashkenaz. And what happened was, it was a very painstaking type of activity to print, because it's not like we do today. I sit at the computer and I type what I want, and I just push the word print, and next thing I know, I look at my printer and I have what I want, and that's the end of the story. In those days, every single letter had to be typeset, every single letter. So you had to look at the manuscript, make sure you're reading correctly, which wasn't always the answer, because the handwriting was always an issue of handwriting. So you can make mistakes easily enough by misreading what you saw. But even if you're reading and you're careful and you have it right, It took a lot of time, every word. So if a typesetter in Europe saw that the Rambam, the Sfardi, is quoting a tefillah or bracha, and he says to himself, I also daven. I know these brachot by heart. So what does he do? Is he saves himself the time of checking the text, because he knows, the Rambam's quoting a bracha. Hey, I know the bracha. I'm just going to typeset the bracha the way I know it, not thinking for a moment that the nusach might be different. So that's one way Nusach Ashkenaz makes it into the Rambam print. The second way is the typesetter did look, and he says, the last guy who copied the manuscript made a mistake. So I'm going to do a favor, I'm going to fix it. And the third type of problem is, I know that the Rambam has a different nusach, but I'm printing it in Europe, and I want to make the book Ashkenazi friendly. So I'm going to already incorporate Nusach Ashkenaz into the text. All three are true. All of these three are phenomena that happened. But now to siphon it out was already a job, because nobody's really ever written about this as a topic, because some people here and there may have made a comment, but to really see it. In this particular example, it happens 3 times. It happens 3 times. So the first time is the Vav HaChibur. So how do we know that the Rambam didn't have the Vav? We know it, first of all, from the comment of the Hagaot Maimoniot, who says, we in Ashkenaz have it. So obviously in his Rambam it didn't have it, if he's making that comment. The second is manuscripts. So we have manuscripts, and we have manuscripts that were edited by the Rambam himself, sent back to Aleppo, to Syria. We have these manuscripts. If you go through the edition of Rav Kapach, who brings manuscripts from Yemen, you go through Rav Nochem Rabinowitz Zatzal's manuscript, Yad Pshuta, edition of the Rambam, and he's using that manuscript from Chalab, from Aleppo. And if you look at Shabtai Frankel, which is a Bnei Brak enterprise from 1975, and they're already aware of things that have incorporated because of manuscript. So it says Ha'arev Nasham Lokeno. So today, and Rav Shilat, he's now one of the Rosh Yeshiva in Ma'ale Adumim, and he publishes his own version called Rambam Miduyak, the precise Rambam. It's all Ha'arev Nasham Lokeno. And then, of course, there's the Friedberg Geniza project, which I bring up on my screen, and I get a span of every single version of this particular Rambam in all the old prints, the modern prints, the Geniza fragments, whatever we have. It's a done deal. The Rambam wrote, Ha'arev na Hashem Elokeinu. And so you have here in the standard, when I say standard Rambam, I'm talking about 95% of the people in the world who own a set of Rambam, who are not into buying new, updated sets of Rambam. Why should I buy it? I have my old one from my grandfather. It still works, right? It's the photo offset of the Vilna Varsha text, and it has V'ha'arev Nasham Elokeinu. That's what you have over here. Furthermore, the end of the bracha, where it says, Baruch Hashem hamlamei Torah la'amo Yisrael, the Rambam was actually asked about this. There's a tshuva, there's a responsum. He says, is that the correct ending? And he says, absolutely not. He says, God doesn't teach us Torah. Hamlamei Torah la'amo Yisrael. We teach each other Torah. God gave us the Torah. So the ending is, Baruch Hashem noten haTorah. Yet, in the Vilna Varsha print, you have Nusach Ashkenaz printed in Hamlamei Torah la'amo Yisrael. So you have a second example of this. And there was even a third, I'll get to in a second, which one it was. I think it was Ve'oskei Toratecha that I underlined, where the Rambam actually had something else. Ve'lomdei Toratecha, right. The Rambam had V'tzetzei Amcha Yodei Shemecha, Ve'lomdei Toratecha, or Oskei Toratecha. It's also a big mess up in the manuscripts, and they printed the Rambam's version of Nusach Ashkenaz, but here I must confess there are different Nusach Ashkenaz on the word Ve'oskei Toratecha or Lomdei Toratecha. So there's a manuscript issue. But what ultimately comes out of the fact that the Rambam does not have the Vav HaChibur, the conjunction and, is he has 3 brachot. And he says it twice. In the second line of source number 3, U'mevarech shalosh brachot, and in the next paragraph of source 3, Halacha Yud Aleph, V'chol yom chayav adam levarech shalosh brachot elu, v'achar kach korei ma'at midivrei Torah. Every day we're obligated to say these 3 brachot, and then you read a little bit of Torah. Why do we read a little bit of Torah? It's like when you say a bar prayer eitz, you take a bite of the apple. You have to have a kizayit. You have to learn a little bit. You can't just make a bracha and birkat Torah without some learning. So there are things printed in our SIDDUR that become the kizayit, the tasting of Torah. What do we have? We have the birkat kohanim, and then we have the Mishnah of Elu Dvarim She'ein Lahem Shi'ur, which is the first Mishnah of Masechet Pe'ah. And that's important because the first Mishnah of Masechet Pe'ah ends with Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. And that's like singing the praises of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So if you're going to cut and paste something out of the world of Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral law, here it's concise, it's short, it's got the point, it's got a beautiful point, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Why Birkat Kohanim? You can't find a few psukim in the Chumash that talk about Torah study? Why did they pick? So I'm going to put this question on hold. We'll get to it in a few minutes. The idea of the 3 brachot, why does the Rambam repeat saying that it's 3 brachot? I mean, that draws our attention to the fact that there's no vav chibur, but fine, he says it. And then he repeats it, says it again. Why does he do that? So our Rabbi Rav Soloveitchik gave once a yahrzeit shir on Gimel Shvat many years ago, and it's in print in the 2nd volume of the book called Shiurim Lezecher Abba Marizal. The Rav's son-in-law, Rav Professor Tversky, Zechron Lebracha, in the 1980s worked on these shiurim, and we remember, those who were there, the shir was a 4-hour production. About 2.5 hours of halacha and an hour and a half of drush, of unbelievable philosophical homiletics. It was unbelievable. That was a takeoff. It was built on the foundations of the halacha of the 2.5 hours. What he printed, Rabbi Tursky printed, was just the first half, was just the halachic part. Here and there, some other of these shiurim, the second part was printed as well, but not for this particular shiur. We don't have it as yet. Maybe one day we will have it. But in that shiur on Birkat Torah, in the 2nd volume of Shiurim Lezecher Abba Marizal, the Rav raised this question: why does the Rambam say 3 brachot? 3 brachot. We got the point. I mean, you don't have to say it a second time. That, and this is a classic brisk, lamdan brisk answer. It comes to teach you another halacha, or what the Reb Chaim used to call zwei dinim, 2 halachot, 2 different halachot. Halacha number 1 is that if you get up at 4 in the morning before the time of Shema, you can't learn Torah yet because you slept. Now, okay, so you slept. We have to take a step back. How come if you go to a shir at 9:15 and then later on in the day, let's say this evening, you go to another shir, you don't say Birkat Torah again? I mean, you're not somebody who got up in the morning and is learning Torah and hasn't budged from his svarim until he went to sleep. We're not in that category at all. So why don't you make a Birkat Torah? I mean, if you eat, you ate breakfast, you made your brachot, you ate lunch, you make another brachot, you make supper, you make another brachot. Midnight snack, even another bracha, right? Why is it called 5-star hotels? They serve you 5 times, right, during the day. It's, I was once on a cruise, and, I told people you wash in the morning, you bench at night, because there was no 72 minutes that you weren't eating. There was no hefsek. There was just no hefsek from the eating. So, there is a hefsek. There's an interruption. So why don't you go back and make the bracha? So the Rav has a big chiddush. He said it once at a siyum in the yeshiva on the first parak of Masechet Chulin. It was in class, in shir. My brother was there, I wasn't there, but it's written up, this siyum. And the Rav said that v'hagita bo yomam v'layla. What is the word v'hagita bo? Why didn't it say v'lilmod bo? Yeshua Perak Aleph. Why did it say you should learn day and night? What does it mean, v'hagita? It means something about contemplation. It comes from the phrase, hegyon libi. Yu l'ratzon imrefi, v'hegyon libi lefanecha. So in Tanakhic language, leiv means the seat of intelligence. It's not that they didn't know. Not that they didn't know that the heart is a pump for blood. They knew that. They knew trephus. They opened up animals, for shechita. They knew. But it was a symbolic. They knew that there's something about the brain. They didn't know the brain as we know it today, but the sechel was always referred to as the heart was the seat of the sechel. So Hegyon Libi means something about meditation. Meditation. And the Rav said that there are two types of meditation. There's an active awareness and a latent awareness. Latent awareness means even if you're not focusing on it right now, but in the subconscious, it's still there. And he gave an example. He says a mother sends off a child to school, right? First grader or kindergarten going off to school. And then, of course, she goes off to work. So when she's at work, does she think about the child the whole time? Most probably not, because she's focusing on her work. But let's assume, somebody mentioned something about school. Yeah, my kid is in school. You recall it immediately. You don't have to start thinking a lot, because it's been there all the time. It's called a latent awareness of the child in school. The Rav said we have a latent awareness of Talmud Torah throughout the day, whether we're studying actively or it's on... sometimes we have this in the computer too. You put it to sleep, right? It's on standby. It's on standby. And therefore, because it's always on standby, there's no need to make another bracha. Because from the point of view of Hegyon Libi, what kicks in is V'hagita bo yomam v'layla, day and night. And there was no interruption. And hence, there's no need for a new bracha during the day. So the obvious question is, maybe you should make a bracha when you're a bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah, and it'll cover you for the whole year. So Rav said, when you sleep more than 72 minutes, which is called shenat keva, that's an interruption. Because there's a break of consciousness, and somehow Chazal saw less than 72 minutes, it's just you're dozing off. But, you're still there. It's not a deep sleep. The Chazal made a distinction between dozing off and a deep sleep. A deep sleep is a hefsek. And therefore, you get up in the morning, 4 in the morning, you want to learn, you have to say bracha. But what if you don't want to say brachot? Because the Super Bowl is on, right? So you don't want to say the bracha. And you go through a day, and today, I'm not learning today. It's not on my schedule. Rabbi Shalom's going to ask me about Koveya itim la Torah. Tuesday's the day I go to the OUisrael, wherever. I don't learn on Monday. I go to work on Monday. So maybe I don't have to say Birkat Torah today. Because it seems that the Rambam said, Hamashkim likro b'Torah kodem sheikra kriyat shema. So you have to say Birkat Torah. Fine. But if I'm not learning Torah that day, it's tzitzis. We have a minhag that we want to be obligated in tzitzis. But if I don't have a 4-cornered garment, I'm not obligated in tzitzis. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that you have to put on a 4-cornered garment. It says that if you wear a 4-cornered garment, then you have to have tzitzis on it. So we want to obligate ourselves, so we've manufactured this beged, it's called talit katan, and so on. Fine. But and there are mitzvot that only if you're in this situation, put a fence around your roof. I never built a house, I never had a roof. Let's assume. So Kadosh Baruch Hu is not going to say, why didn't you fulfill the mitzvah of ma'akel legagecha? I never owned a house. Never had to. Fine. So there are going to be many mitzvot that, how come you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of veheshivet hagzela asher gazal, return the stolen goods? Because I was never a gazlan. I never stole anything. What do you want from me? So there are mitzvot in Torah, right? I always tell people, getting divorced, the gittin is one of the 613. But you love your wife and you never got divorced. God's not going to hold you accountable for not fulfilling that mitzvah. There are different mitzvot that are for particular situations. And if you're not in that situation, you don't have that mitzvah. So if I didn't learn that day, so then I don't have the mitzvah of Birkat Torah, to say Birkat Torah. So Rambam comes and says, every day you have an obligation to say Birkat Torah. Whether you thought you're going to learn or not, you have an obligation. That's source the halacha Yud Aleph. B'chol yom chayav adam levarech shlosh brachot elu, and then take a tasting of Torah. Even though you're not planning to have a chavruta that day, go to a shir that day, learn by yourself that day, a little bit of Torah you have to have. One a day multiple vitamin. You have to put a little bit in your mouth, a little bit of Torah. And that is important. So the Rav said that the Rambam is teaching us two different things. One is that when you get up in the morning, that you have to say Birkat Torah, and you can't say, I said the bracha yesterday already, even though it's still nighttime. Because if you learn at 8 at night, 9 at night, 10 at night, you still don't make a new bracha. Because you're still covered from the bracha in the morning. It's just that you went to sleep, and that Shenat Keva causes the interruption. So now you have a halacha that kicks in, you have to say the bracha again. And the second halacha is that whether or not you're planning to study Torah that day, you have an obligation to say Birkat Torah daily and taste Torah a bit. So that's how the Rav understood it. And I'm not here to contradict my great Rebbe, because this is a wonderful understanding of the Rambam. Whether or not the Rambam had it in mind or not, you have to realize this is what's called a chidush. This is a novel understanding of the Rambam's words, because the Rambam doesn't say it. It's being inferred by what the Rambam did by writing it twice and seeing it in the context of Halacha Yud and the context of Halacha Yud Aleph and making his point. And I wrote in my book on the Conversations of the Rav that I escorted the Rav once back home from the Yortzeit Shir, and the Yortzeit Shir was one great chidush after the other. Those who had the schut of being there, he just walked away, blown away. And I asked the Rav, I said, does Rebbe believe that the Rambam had these things in mind? And he looked at me and he said, what's the difference? Was it a good shir? I said, Rebbe, it was a great shir. What's the difference? And the next morning, I had an opportunity to talk to the Rav's son, Chaim Soloveitchik, who was in the apartment, and I said, this is what happened yesterday, and what do you think? Because he's a scholar also, not just Hamchocham, also into the scholarly world. He said, it's legitimate. You take Yahavdil, he said, you take the U.S. Constitution, and the founding fathers wrote it when they wrote it, with whatever they had in mind. And then 250 years later, the Supreme Court justices are reading between the lines of a particular amendment and saying, pshat, what the founding fathers most probably had in mind. Do they know what they had in mind? No, but it's legitimate. You can do that. You can come up with ideas. You can somehow expand. You can condense and so on, based on a certain usage of a language, what we call a diuk b'lashon, your precise language and so on. Is this legitimate? So you can squeeze out from the Rambam's language whatever you want. It's Torah. It has a din, has a halacha of Torah, and you have to say Birkat Torah on that chidush also. But whether or not the Rambam actually had it in mind, once Chaim Soloveitchik says, maybe we're going to find out that Rav Kapach understood the Rambam better than my great-grandfather Rav Chaim, and I thought that was like heresy coming from Chaim Soloveitchik. Wow. And basically what we were saying was that Rav Kapach from Yemen has this direct line of mode of thinking of the Rambam, because the Yemenites in the 12th century, they embraced and endorsed the Rambam totally, and the Rambam had much communication, a lot of communication between the Rambam and the Yemenite Jewish community. So Rav Kapach, who's like a Sion of that community, has the Rambam's mindset, and Reb Chaim Soloveitchik was willing to admit that maybe Rav Kapach's got it right, and his great-grandfather, Reb Chaim, who had all these novelei on the Chedushim, it's nice. It's nice for a shir in the yeshiva, but that may not be what the Rambam had in mind, Yeah, you're going to ask him. Yeah, I'll get to you.
What if later on someone finds a Rambam that contradicts this easily? Would that mean
I make a living doing that. That's going to be engraved on my tombstone. That's what I do. I'm working with manuscripts, and believe me, I give all the credit to all the great Gedolei Israel who wrote what they wrote. I remember telling my brother over a whole idea proving unequivocally in the famous contradiction in the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, place A, place B. We can show manuscript the Rambam changed his mind, and in one place it wasn't corrected, and that's why when it got to print, it shows up as a contradiction. And there's a great shir by Reb Chaim Soloveitchik on this and everything. And my brother says, you might be right, but you're going to say this in a shir kloli in the yeshiva? I mean, that's what you're going to say, that the Rambam changed his mind? I said, yeah, listen, this is what we're going to say, and you want to know what the Rambam meant, what he actually said, not what you think he could have said. So a lot of times, these chidushim are really standing on the shoulders of the greats, and they're building themselves up. Okay, it's perfectly legitimate enterprise in Talmud Torah. Don't get me wrong. But, when you want to say, this is what the Rambam said, let's be careful. Yeah, Bakasha.
Can't you say that tefillah is also Talmud Torah? And since you daven every day, you have to say the brachot every day.
Okay, so first of all, whether tefillah per se is considered Talmud Torah, that I'm not 100% sure, but I would agree that in the Siddur, there are ample amount of Torah quotes that demand Birkat Torah before you daven. And that's why it's there in the Siddur. Whether it's Psukkah de Zimra, I mean, my gosh, that's all Tillim, right there. Shirei David Avdecha Nalelcha. Whether it's Kriyat Shema, that's Torah, and so on. So there's an awful lot of, whether it's Kriyat Torah that day, so there's an awful lot of Torah in the Siddur itself, which is one of the reasons that when in Shulchan Aruch it says, and it's in Orach Chaim, Siman Mem Zayin, the very last halakha, 4 words with no comment of the Ramah, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Sfardi, he says, Nashim mevorchot birkat haTorah. Women say the bracha. That triggered a whole discussion. Why? What do you mean, why? Well, doesn't it say that v'limadetem otam et b'neichem, we shall teach our sons b'neichem velo b'notechem? My daughter Chana took that out of the Gemara already. She threw it in Geniza. But I explained to her that there's no need to put that in Geniza because the Rav explained that what the halakha does not exempt women from Talmud Torah. The halakha lowered the bar of v'hagita bo yomam v'layla. And how that sits in modern day feminism and so on, you have to work that out. But the Rav goes further and says that within the framework of Limud Torah, there is a difference in obligation between obligation of man, obligation of woman to Talmud Torah, but there is an obligation of woman for Talmud Torah, no doubt. When we talk about the mitzvot that women are obligated, so I made a calculation that women are obligated in 95% of the mitzvot. And about 5% of the mitzvot, women, I'll use the word enjoy, I don't know, have an exemption. 5%, no more than that. And if I would open up a koilel and take 20 avrechim and support them for 20 years, that they should study only the Torah that women are obligated to study and never to repeat the same subject twice, in 20 years they'd never repeat anything. So nobody should tell me that a woman doesn't have to study Torah, and that's one of the lines that some of the poskim say. Of course women have to study Torah, but there's a little difference. A woman should not say, in the context of her family life, put all her children on hold and put the family on hold because, she's got to study 6 hours now. The halacha didn't want that to happen. That doesn't mean a woman, in whatever context she may be in, she can't learn 6 hours. But the Rav went further and said there's another mitzvah called Ahavat Hashem, love of God. And there's no distinction between men and women. And the Rambam defines the mitzvah of Ahavat Hashem as intellectual study. He says you have to connect to God intellectually. And he says it clearly that women are part of that. And there's no difference between men and women on this. So certainly women have to say Birkat Torah. Some of the poskim, like the Mishnah Berurah, that's the Chavetz Chaim, he says because women daven, so they open up a Siddur, and there are sections of Torah in the Siddur as part of the davening, so of course they have to say Birkat Torah beforehand. So that's his line. That's But Reb Chaim from Brisk, the Rav's grandfather, took a completely different step. And he said the Birkat Torah is not a bracha to engage us in the mitzvah. It's not like saying a bracha before shofar or lulav or sukkah or svirat omer or any other bracha that you say before a mitzvah, talis or tefillin. He says the bracha, Birkat Torah, is not that. It's that the Torah itself requires that before you study it, you offer praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that He actually gave the Torah, and it's based on a pasuk, Ki Shem Hashem Ekra Havu Godel Elokeinu, Parshat Ha'azinu, that when merely mentioning God's name, and Talmud Torah in a wide sense is called mentioning God's name, Havu Godel, offer words of Gedula v'Shevach, words of praise to God. And that's what led the Ramban to argue with the Rambam. He says, you see that Birkat Torah is a biblical mitzvah, because the Rambam only counts one bracha as biblical, that is benching, Birkat Hamazon, Ve'achalta v'savata uverachta. All the others are rabbinic, says the Rambam. The Ramban says, no, there are two that are biblical. Birkat Torah is biblical. Ki Shem Hashem Ekra Havugod Elokeinu. So the Rambam also knows of that bracha, pasuk, but nevertheless he saw that the obligation was rabbinic in origin. Beseda. But you have here, with regard to the Rabbi Chaim's idea, that the Birkat, the very study of Torah itself, demands divrei shevach v'gdula. Whether a man studying, whether a child studying, whether a woman studying, makes no difference. And therefore, that's why women are obligated in the bracha of Torah. Yeah, Vaksha, I'm listening.
If I'm taking 2-hour nap in the afternoon, do I have to say difference?
So there would be a safek, because this 72 minutes is also, it's not halacha l'Moshe Messinai. So the minhag is, even if you take a Shabbos shluf in the afternoon and you go over the 72-minute marker and you go to a shul and you hear a shir, the minhag is not to so. It's because it's a safek brachot. And safek brachot, whenever there's a doubt whether you have to make another bracha or not, we always go lenient, and that is, we're strict not to say the bracha. We say lekula, we go lenient not to say, but the reason is because you don't want to say a bracha in vain. So we're not sure. So that's the minhag. The minhag is that even if you shluff a little bit, but if somebody has a night shift and he sleeps 8 hours in the daytime and then he cracks a sefer, so there might be a good reason. Yeah. We're getting there. Thank you. That's why Rivka is here. Because I said I'll get to it later. Right, so later can be in 3 weeks. Later. I told my wife I have Rivka here because sometimes in the last few years, sometimes I open a window in the computer sense and I forget to close the window. I don't know where I'm holding. But Rivka is here always to remind me how to close the window. I really do appreciate it. So no. So the question of why Birkat Torah is the sampling of Torah. Elu dvarim she'en lehem shiur, I understand it. V'talmud Torah k'neged kulam. So the Aruch HaShulchan. Who's the Aruch HaShulchan? Rabbi Chil Mechel Halevi Epstein, who lives in the late 19th century, and it's a phenomenal series. It's based on the style of Shulchan Aruch, but it's much greater than that. It's a type of encyclopedia Talmudit, and it's just wonderful. And came out in the end of the end of the 19th century, and he actually draws attention to the fact that Ashkenazim have 2 brachot of the Birkat Torah, and the Rambam has 3 brachot. And he says, you know what this might be? He says the Rambam divides Torah study into a triangular type of syllabus. On top it's called Mikra. Mikra means Tanakh. Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. And then on one side of the triangle, it's Mishnah. And on the other side, it's Talmud/Gemara. Now what's the difference between Mishnah and Gemara? Mishnah and Gemara is 2 different styles of learning. Mishnah means setting out the dinim. It's a ledger of dinim, of halachot, one after the other. Gemara means analysis, discussion. So it's 2 different things. So why do we call the Mishnayot Mishnah? Because it conforms to this style of learning. But so does Mishnah Torah of the Rambam. It's also Mishnah learning, and so is the Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah type learning. Whereas Gemara is called Talmud because it's discussion and analysis. It's a different type of Gemara, and I would put the letters of Rav Moshe Feinstein into that category too, because that's what it is. He's not telling me, here's the question, here's the answer, here's the question, here's the answer. It's an analysis. So it's Talmud. So according to the Rambam, because he says we should divide our Torah study day into 3, he says it. And it's based on a Gemara Masechet Kiddushin on the word Vishinantam. Don't read Vishinantam, but Vishilashtam. It's a play on words here, divided by 3. Mikra, Mishnah, Gemara. So the Rambam says, you divide your day. So the Gemara even says, what am I supposed to do? How does that mean? 1/3 of my life Mikra, 1/3 of my life Mishnah, 1/3 of my life... How do you know when the end is? If somebody would tell me I'm going to live till 90, fine, it's going to work. 30, 30, 30. But nobody tells you these things. So how do you know? So the Gemara says, all right. Every week Okay, every week. So that's a 2 days Mishnah, 2 days Mishnah, 2 days Mikra, 2 days Mishnah, 2 days Gemara. So how do you know you're going to finish the week? So Gemara says, all right, each day. A third of the day, you're going to study Mikra, a third of the day Mishnah, a third of the day. Because the Gemara says, doesn't even bother asking, what if you're going to die 2 in the afternoon, right? So the Gemara doesn't bother that. That's really ridiculous. But basically, the Gemara says, if you have an hour to learn, so 20 minutes Mikra, 20 minutes Mishnah, 20 minutes Gemara. Many of the poskim later said that that's at the beginning of your learning career. But once you have the hang of it, of Tanakh in the back pocket, you can shift more to the Gemara side. What they do incorrectly in the yeshivas today is they start with Gemara in 5th grade before there's any solid basis in Mikra, in Tanakh, and in Mishnah. And it's wrong. Now, some Chederim here in Israel that have gone back to the old system. The old system is mentioned in Pirkei Avot. It says, Ben Chamesh leMikra, 5 years old you start with Tanakh. Ben Eser leMishnah, 10 years old Mishnah. Chamesh Esrei Talmud. Now that word Talmud is in a Mishnah, so which Talmud is it? It's the style of learning, the analysis, and so on. Which means, according to Chazal, you should have 5 years of Tanakh in the back pocket before you even open up the first Mishnah, and you should have 5 years of finishing Shas Mishnayot before you start learning Gemara. But they don't do that today, and it's a big mistake. It's a very, very, very big mistake. Today there are yeshiv boys who they know of a pasuk in Yeshayahu because the Gemara in Sanhedrin quoted it, or it happens to be a Haftarah. Other than that, they don't know Tanakh. In America, we didn't learn Tanakh properly. Here, in Eretz Yisrael, Tanakh is being studied properly. It's mamish being studied. I mean, the Chamalaibu Etzler Hashem has a lot to do with this, but for sure. So let's get to the Birkas Kainim before Rivka tells me again. I have to get back to it, right? Right, so she can go home with a clear head, right? Okay, so we have a division of 3 according to the Rambam, and the Tosfot, who we have V'hareva, it's a division of 2. So the response is a response of 2. Why is it 2? One is Torah shebichtav, the written law, and one is Torah shebal peh. Not to split Mishnah Talmud, but Mishnah Talmud hyphenated is the oral law. And that's why we have 2 brachot. That's good enough. 2 brachot, and we respond with Torah shebal peh, which is Elu dvarim she'en lehem shiur, and we respond with Birkat Kohanim. What does that have to do with Torah shebichtav? You could pull any psukim out of the Chumash, or Tehillim for that matter, to talk about the wonderful mitzvah of Talmud Torah, because the Gemara uses Birkat Kohanim to say something about the reading of Torah shebichtav, the written law, in public, or we call laning, Kriyat Torah. And it's a Gemara Masechet Megillah, Daf Kav Gimel. And it says that we have 3 people getting aliyot to the Torah on Monday and Thursday. And we have 5 people getting aliyot on Yom Tov. And 7 people getting aliyot on Shabbat. What does that correspond to? What is there any type of... So the Gemara says it corresponds to Birkat Kohanim, because Birkat Kohanim is a triple-edged bracha, and the first bracha has 3 words, Yivrech Hashem Shrecha. The second bracha has 5 words, Ya'er Hashem Panav Elecha V'Chuneka, and the third has 7 words, Yisa Hashem Panav Elecha V'Yisrael B'Chai Shalom. And as we say in Chinese, so what? So what? That's just a technical thing, 3, 5, and 7. And the Gemara says, from where does the 3, having 3 aliyot on weekday, Monday, Thursday, and 5 aliyot on Yom Tov, and 7 aliyot on Shabbat, where does it come from? Keneged mi? Where does it correspond to? Birkat Kohanim. What's the connection? So here you have to employ some homiletic thought to it. Yivrecha Hashem V'Shmerecha is actually a bracha that you should succeed in your financial matters and sustenance, we call parnasah. Rashi says in Parshat Naso, Yevarechecha, sheyitbarchu nechasecha, your belongings should be blessed. V'yishmerecha, the ganavim, the shodadim, shouldn't come and take it from you. So not only should you be blessed that you should have earning potential, but you should also be guarded and fenced that nobody should take it away from you. So that's bracha number 1, which is a weekday concern. It's a very much a weekday concern. Every time the Torah talks about Shabbat, it doesn't say Yom HaShvi Shabbat L'Hashem Elokecha Lo Taseh Melacha. It also prefaces by saying Sheshit Yamim Taseh Melachtecha. Why does it say that? We'd all figure it out that if you're not allowed to work on Shabbat, you are allowed to work on the first 6 days. So the Vilna Gaon says that Sheshit Yamim Taseh Melachtecha is a mitzvah. You're supposed to work. You're not supposed to sit around doing nothing. What am I supposed to do? Take a look at the list of the 39 prohibited activities on Shabbat and pick and choose. You don't have to do all of them on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Pick and choose. So he's a farmer and she's writing and he's building and all those things that are forbidden on Shabbat, that's what you're supposed to be doing. And this idea comes from the Gan Eden story, where it says to Adam and Chava, Mikol eitz hagan achol tochel, u'mi'etz asher betoch hagan lo tochal mimenu, ki biyom achocha mimenu mot tamud. The Torah, Kadosh Baruch Hu could have told them, don't eat from the tree, from the fruit of the center tree. That's it. They'd figure out from themselves that they can eat from the other tree. No. Mikol eitz hagan achol tochel. Eat from the old. Engage in the pleasures of life. That's why I made this world for you. You should enjoy it. But these don't eat. Same thing with kashrut. This what you should eat, Mikola tochel, and this not to eat. The Torah tells in Parshat Shmini which meat yes and which meat not. Which fish yes and which fish not. Because the yes is not just by process of elimination. I understand the not, so I figured it out myself. No, the Torah wants us to engage in eating good foods and tasty foods. Oneg Shabbat is a mitzvah even. And so on. And therefore, Yivracha Hashem Shmorecha, yes, Sheshit Yamim Taseh Melachtecha, you do your work, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu will bless you, and you'll expand and grow and so on, and nobody's going to take it away from you. That's a Monday, Thursday concern. That's a weekday concern. So that's why that bracha corresponds to the aliyot, 3 aliyot on Monday, Thursday. Yom Tov, Ya'er Hashem Panav Elecha V'chuneka. The Medrash in Medrash Rabbah in Parshat Naso says, what is Ya'er Hashem Panav Elecha? It's what we say in Sim Shalom, Ki ba'or panecha natata lanu Hashem Elokeinu, Torat Chayim, v'avat chesed. Yitein Hashem me'or haTorah. It is spiritual illumination. The second bracha has to do with Matan Torah. Now, Matan Torah is just Shavuos. Chag HaShavuot, Man Matan Torateinu. Wrong. Everything is Matan Torah, Pesach and Sukkot as well. As Moshe Rabbeinu stood at the sneh, at the burning bush, I used to say years ago, that's when the President of the United States got upset. He was the burning bush. But doesn't work today, right? The Moshe Rabbeinu was standing at, it was Chorev, it was Har Sinai, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that the proof, V'zeh lecha ha'ot ki anochi shlachticha, בהוציאך את העם ממצרים תעבדון את האלוקים על ההר הזה. You are coming back to this mountain, which means everything about Yetziat Mitzrayim was the lead up to Matan Torah. And we echo this on Seder night with drinking the fourth cup, corresponding to V'lekachta etchem li la'am v'yiti lechem Elokim, which took place at Har Sinai, not at Yetziat Mitzrayim. And the mitzvah that binds Yetziat Mitzrayim with Matan Torah is Sfirat HaOmer. It's exactly what it is. Ramban even goes out and says, Sfirat HaOmer is Chol HaMoed. It's a type of Chol HaMoed which binds, connects, bridges the gap between Pesach and Shavuot. But don't leave Sukkot out in the cold, because Sukkot was actually supposed to be in Nisan, which means the Seder was supposed to be in the Sukkah. That's what it was supposed to be. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with his infinite wisdom, wanted to split it by 6 months. So it's not an accident that Sukkot is also the 15th. And there are many halachot that are derived on the bridge called 15-15, the 15th of Nisan and the 15th of Tishrei. And Sukkot is categorically Mitzrayim. Kiva leman yedu dorotechem, kiva Sukkot oshafti et bnei Yisrael, ba'otziyotam eretz Mitzrayim. So all three of the Chagim are Yetziat Mitzrayim or Matan Torah. And hence, Yiten Hashem me'or Torah, Ya'er Hashem panav elecha, which has 5 words. That's why on Yom Tov we have 5 aliyot. And Shabbat, you don't have to scratch your head to figure out why the association of 7. I mean, the number says it all. Yisah Hashem panav elecha, but furthermore, the bracha of Shalom, where we say Boi v'Shalom ateret ba'ala. What is the? We say Shabbat Shalom. What does it mean when we say Shabbat Shalom? Where's the Shalom means peace and harmony. What is the peace and harmony of Shabbat? The answer is, if the first bracha is a weekday-ish bracha, of materialism, and the second bracha is the Yom Tov bracha of spirituality. Shabbat is the fusion of the two. It's making peace with materialism and spirituality at the same time. That's what Shabbat is. So it's a Yom Kadosh with Oneg Shabbat. So the kugel is as much as a part of the experience of Shabbat as the Ner Shabbat, which is a highly spiritual mitzvah. Highly spiritual mitzvah, no doubt. So it all goes together. I mean, there was a Chassidish Rebbe who once said, why do we eat kugel on Shabbat? He said, it's because kugel is gematria Shabbat. So a Chassid quickly made the calculation that it's way off. I mean, it's really way off. So he tells this to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, es noch a shtickle, eat another piece. Eat another piece, you'll get to it, Neseda. So this is because Birkat Kohanim is associated with the laning Kriyat Torah of weekday, Yom Tov and Shabbat, 3, 5, and 7, Chazal felt this was a good selection of being the tasting of Torah on a, no matter whether, nice, right? You better say it over in my name because that was a chiddush. It's a nice homiletic thought to put this together. Okay. I thought we'd finish this page. We didn't. So you can return it to me or bring it next week, Ms. Shem. But we're going to move on to another page. I promise you.